So last night I finished the book of Exodus. In the book of Exodus, we see Moses. And Moses was a baby who was almost killed when he was a child because the Pharaoh got word that there was going to be a powerful baby boy that was going to come from the lineage of the people that were enslaved in Egypt. In his anger and in his trying to mess with God's plan, he had all of the babies murdered. It was all of the boy babies, to be specific. The mother of Moses put him in a basket and let him flow down the river so that he had a chance at life, because with his family, there was no chance of survival. So he did that, and Pharaoh's sister ended up finding him, and she had just given birth to a stillborn. So she took Moses in as her son. He always felt like an outsider. And one day he ended up killing one of his own men because they were being abusive to his people. Speaking of baby boys, he's just sitting right behind his mommy. And he's just so sweet. He's just the sweetest boy in the world. So then Moses ends up having to run away because the Pharaoh gets word of this and he's going to kill Moses. So he runs away and he's off in the desert and he meets a woman. He's a very respectful man, and she takes note of that and tells her father about him, and her father tells her to invite him to dinner. And so he ends up staying there for years, marries the woman, and they have babies together. Eventually, God tells Moses that he needs to go back to his people because he's the one that is going to free them from slavery. And so Moses is hesitant. He's like, absolutely not. I'm not going back there. And he's like, I can barely speak. What do you mean I'm going to go save a whole nation? And God's like, you are going to do it. Don't worry about the speaking part. Your brother Aaron will speak for you. Eventually, Moses gives in and he goes back to Egypt. He frees his people, but there's a lot of stuff that happens. So Pharaoh is a very powerful man, right? He comes from a family that's been in power for a really long time. He grew up in privilege. He's a very stubborn man. When Moses is calling for him to release his people, the Pharaoh's like, absolutely not. Get out of my face. Want nothing to do with you. Peace out. You're lucky I didn't kill you. And Moses is like, you're going to free my people or you're going to experience a lot of consequences from God. So it's up to you. There's plagues that happen. And in it, it's God's way of saying, like, release these people. I'm involved in this. I'm sending you supernatural consequences so that you know it's me. It's not just a man coming to you and telling you, like, hey, release these people. I want my people. Every time a plague comes, he tries to give in and then he retracts from his original agreement. Moses keeps getting fed up with him, like, dude, just let the people go. The Egyptians used to worship flies as a god. They also used to worship like the golden calf for their food. All the gods that they would worship, there was a plague, not all of them, but like some of the plagues focused more so on bringing destruction to those gods to show Pharaoh, like, your gods aren't going to do anything to stop me. Like, I am the ultimate God. I am the God. So you can pray all you want to your golden calf, but I'm going to kill all of your livestock. Moses' people didn't have their livestock killed, just the Egyptians. We see a lot of stubbornness in Pharaoh. We can see some of ourselves, maybe some people that we know, right, where God keeps sending them signs to turn to him and they're being disobedient. God had a lot of patience with him, and after a certain amount of plagues, the Bible says God hardened Pharaoh's heart. The fact that we see this done to Pharaoh doesn't mean that God hardens every stubborn person's heart, right? But that was always like a question for me, like, okay, God, why did you harden his heart? But what I came to understand was that God hardened his heart because Pharaoh was already being disobedient, and God knew in Pharaoh's disobedience, God's plan was ultimately going to prevail. So our choices can lead us to becoming permanent enemies of God in history or permanent warriors of God. One or the other. You're not in the middle. You're not in the in-between, because even people that don't believe in spirituality, well, they're in the enemy's camp, because anything that goes against God is Satanism, right? That's essentially what Satanism is. It's not some like weird little witchery stuff. Satanism is just do your own thing, live your own life. Life is all about you. Be selfish. Who cares? Do whatever you want. Essentially, people that are not living for God are Satanists. I know it sounds harsh, but look, I'm just the messenger. Don't shoot the messenger. Talk to God about it. So God hardens Pharaoh's heart, and eventually he ends up letting the people go because the last plague, all of the firstborn sons had to die. we'll never fully understand why God would do such a thing. But at the end of the day, it's like God is a vengeful God. Vengeance is his. It's not up to us. Like sometimes in our human minds, we can think like, oh, I'm going to hurt this person because they hurt me. And God tells us not to be like that. He's like, no, vengeance is mine. Like, you be still, I will fight for you. We see that in Exodus 14:14. In God's vengeance, he ended up killing Pharaoh's oldest son along with all the other firstborns. And it was kind of showing Pharaoh like, okay, tit for tat, I'm going to do to you what you've been doing to these people. Like, don't you see that what you're doing is wrong? It's kind of like karma, right? People call it karma, but the Bible calls it you reap what you sow. Whatever you plant in this world, it will come back tenfold to you. So if you're hurting people, you are going to get very hurt one way or another in a way that God knows is going to hurt you. So eventually the people get let out through a supernatural way, right? God parts the Red Sea and then closes it back up when the Pharaoh again changed his mind, because after his oldest son died, he was like, all right, get out of my land. Peace out. Don't take your food. Moses is like, no, we're going to take the food. We need the food to sacrifice to our God, to worship him. Sin separates us from God. And in order to bring closeness back together, life has to be paid. That's the only way. The wages of sin is death. That's why Jesus came to pay the ultimate price. He died innocent, the most innocent human being to ever walk this earth. He died for all of our sins so that we wouldn't need to sacrifice animals anymore to bridge that gap. Eventually Pharaoh was like, fine, just get out. So Moses got out. Well, tried to, right? And he was on his way out with all the people. And then the Pharaoh had a change of heart and was like, I'm coming for you, homie. And got all of his men, and they all went after Moses and the people. And they were terrified. These were men of war, men of battle. They had their horses, they had their swords, they had everything they needed for a battle. And Moses' people had nothing. They just had their food and their babies, and they were just people. And when it got back to them that Pharaoh was coming after them, it was like, okay, what the heck are we supposed to do? Like, God help us, right? God was like, don't worry, I'm going to take care of it. But imagine being in the middle of that and just like, what the heck? Like, how are we going to get ourselves out of this pickle? And God did it by parting the Red Seas and then eventually closed them up when the soldiers were horsing their way through because they were on their horses. And Pharaoh and the soldiers, they all died. And in the desert, the people are complaining to Moses, like, when are we going to get out of here? It's hot. We want food. Moses would go to God and be like, God, the people are complaining. Help me out. Help a brother out. And God was like, okay, don't worry. I'm going to provide for you guys and continue to provide for them. But they were very sassy with it, just like Novi. They were very sassy people, and they just cried and whined a lot. And so God had a promised land for them, right? The promised land of milk and honey. Because of their ways and because of their rebellion and because they, even in the desert, tried making gods that they could worship. For example, they got all of their gold together when Moses was away for some weeks. He went away to get the commandments from God, right? Which ended up being the 10 Commandments. They weren't sure what happened to Moses because he was gone for so long. So they ended up getting all their gold together and burning it and creating a little golden statue that they could worship. Even people that believe in Jesus, we can be guilty of worshiping things that are not God. Whether it's our food, whether it's our car, whether it's our home, whether it's money, whether it's a job, whether it's our children, whether it's our husband, whether it's our wife, whether it's something that is not God, we can put it on a pedestal. We make idols of things. So we can easily look back and criticize these people and be like, wow, they got their gold together and they made a statue of it and worshipped it. Like, wow, homie, you're probably worshiping something that's not God right now in your life. So be careful. It's easy to fall into this. In that time, the reason why they fell into this trap is because imagine that they were in the middle of the desert. They were so hot. It's like, think about it. Right now it's 105 outside. Just imagine that kind of weather and having to stand outside in the desert where there is no water, there's no extra food, there's no resources that you can depend on. So these people were like, okay, let's go back to our old ways. Let's worship something that'll bring us these things. And so eventually when Moses came back with the 10 Commandments, he saw what they had done and he got so angry that he broke the 10 Commandments, and then God got mad at him. Like, dude, chill out. Don't act like that. And Moses was embarrassed, but he was so angry. Like, how could you guys do this after everything we've been through, and you're going to go and worship this gold that you've melted down as a statue? Are you serious? God got mad at him and essentially told him, look, I'll give you guys the land of milk and honey, but I'm not going with you. So you guys are going to be there without me. And Moses and the people were like, no, we want you. So we'd rather stay in the desert. not inherit the land of milk and honey and have you. And he's like, okay, deal. Your children will inherit the land. That's essentially what happened. And in a lot of the chapters, it talks about the temple that was built for God, the temple where Aaron and his sons became priests to the people, and that was their place of worship to God, and where they made sacrifices. And they had this ritual that they would perform in order to go in there and to be as clean as possible before God and all of that stuff. So we've come a long way, guys, because now we're the temple, right? This temple that was built back in that time, it was so intricate. It is so detailed. It's chapter after chapter after chapter, all of the details, and it was so specific and so perfect. These people that were so disloyal to God took this project so seriously. Every little thing, like every single little detail is all written in there. And it's like, wow, like in their detailed work of this temple, they were considering God the whole time. That's such a beautiful thing. Like all the time and the energy that they spent on it was so perfected and is so special. That's a little spiel on the story of Exodus and Moses and the power that he had through God. It differs from the story of Genesis, because in Genesis we see a lot of narratives in there. We see a lot of different lives. We see Adam and Eve. We see Jacob and Esau. We see Joseph and his siblings. We see Joseph's parents. We see Pharaohs in there. We see all kinds of different people in the book of Genesis. And in Exodus, it solely focuses on Moses and his life and what he came to do. When you're connected to God, you're going to be a part of history. People are going to know about you. The things that you do, the things that you did, the things that you said, the things you believed, the things that you brought forward to the world. You are a vessel of God, and God will use you, and you just have to be willing. Not every woman is called to teach, just like not every man is called to teach. In psychology, we know that women are more emotional beings. So women's focus should be on mastering their emotions. We also know, I did a presentation on the fact that our emotional maturity is that of the caveman days. Our intelligence, our ability to reason and logic, that has matured, and that has evolutionarily been passed down from generations before us. Our ability to control our emotions is something that we have to master within our own lifetime. It is our work to do. Somebody else cannot do your emotional work for you. You have to do that. God used women all throughout the Bible to teach about him, to give lessons to the world. Your life is a testimony to God. Whether you're on his side or whether you're against him, your life is being used as a testimony. A person in the future will look back on your life and recognize it. Regardless of whether or not you're for the masses, or you're for you and God alone, or you're for you and the people around you, people are watching you, and your life will speak volumes on what side of God you were on. Paul wrote a letter to the church of Corinthian speaking on the women, that they should be quiet and they shouldn't interrupt. And it's because that specific location, the teachers were men, and women in that culture were very loud and very disruptive during the services and would ask a lot of questions during the services. And so Paul was like, let's tone it down. Men, you can teach your wives at home, but let's stop all this disruption because it impedes with others' ability to take in the word. Look, God is the center of my life. I talk about him every single day of my life. I can't help it. And if I'm going to share about my life here, God is going to be at the center of it. It's just important to be genuine, right? You can still be yourself and be a vessel of God. It is when you believe that you can stay yourself and continue to sin and continue to go against God's word and say, this is just who I am, like take it or leave it, God. And it's like, that's very sassy. Certain sass is fine, but that's like stubborn sass. That's like Pharaoh status sass. We're not trying to be Pharaoh status sass. We're trying to be cute sassy. Okay, we're trying to be Job sassy. Job was very sassy, but he was the kind of righteous sass that God is okay with, because Job questioned God a lot in his loss. He lost so much. He lost so much. His family, his children, his livestock, his house, everything was gone. And in his sass, God heard him because it was righteous sass. So when you're sassy with God, be righteous about it. Don't be stubborn about your sass of not wanting to change what God is calling you to change in your life.